Dexter has been killing people since he was 20 years old, and in that time, he has amassed over 160 kills. And some of the killers he has dealt with have had insanely high on-screen kills themselves. Of course, all of that killing has been spread out over the 8 original seasons, a prequel series, and 2 sequel seasons so far. But which arc was the bloodiest? Today we are breaking down which season of Dexter was truly the deadliest one. But first, let's start with a couple of honorable mentions. Season 4, total deaths, 16. The first honorable mention goes to what many people consider the best season of Dexter ever made, Season 4. It centered on Arthur Mitchell, better known as the Trinity Killer, a madman who'd built his entire identity around a frighteningly dark and efficient kill ritual. His pattern was a carefully reconstructed cycle rooted in his childhood trauma. He always killed in sets of 4, and each of those murders were meant to recreate the darkest moments of his youth, when he watched his sister die, lost his own innocence, learned that his mother committed suicide, and then lost control and beat his own father to death. These were the deaths that shaped Trinity, but they didn't happen during Season 4, so they don't count. But the deaths he did cause on screen do count to the total, and they were still just as horrifying. The first Trinity victim we see from Trinity in Season 4 was a young woman named Lisa Bell. At first, it looked like she represented the first step of his cycle. Like all of the women before her in the other cities, she was attacked in her home, her femoral artery was slit, and she was left to bleed to death in her own bloody bathtub. Trinity had been doing this for decades all over the country, and he always staged these bathtub deaths as suicides, but they were far from voluntary. He was in control of every detail. He made sure of that by selecting small, single young women who would have never seen him coming. These murders were disturbingly intimate. The bathtub murders symbolized the traumatic loss of his own sister, Vera, who died when she fell in the shower and cut herself on the shower door after she caught Arthur peeping on her while she bathed. Like every step in his ritual, Lisa's death was a twisted attempt to relive and control a major moment that destroyed his childhood. If he wasn't already obsessed with Vera, he definitely was after her death. He never recovered from that initial blow, and neither did his mom. Next, Trinity killed a woman named Tarla Grant, who represented the mother figure in his demented little pattern. Trinity kidnapped her one night and brought her to a high point in the city where he forced her to jump to her death. He wouldn't push her either. He needed her to do it on her own to replicate his own mother's decision to kill herself. Like any smart monster, he vetted Tarla beforehand, presenting himself as a caring and friendly neighbor who just wanted to help her with her groceries. The whole time, he was really just gathering information about Tarla and her family to make sure she was the right target, a mother of 2, and that getting to her when he wanted to wouldn't be difficult. She never suspected a thing, and days later she was found by the homicide department dead and decomposing on the concrete after the forced jump. Just like the bathtub murders, these were never investigated as homicides because they all looked like suicides. This allowed Trinity to keep his pattern hidden from police for as long as he did, but the next part of the ritual wasn't so clean. The third victim in this cycle was Earl Dorman, and he was the father figure of Trinity's ritual. Trinity stalked him at his job and then returned on a later date to beat him to death with a hammer. The bludgeoning murders were way more aggressive than all of the others. Again, when he was younger, Arthur killed his own father when he finally got tired of his dad abusing him. That's why, when he killed men like Earl, Trinity was unhinged and explosive. These parts allowed Arthur to both destroy and become the violent patriarch he always hated but somehow still embodied in his own life. With these murders, the kill count of Season 4 seems to be at 3, but we know now that the ritual actually started with the abduction of a young boy who was never seen again. The boy he killed before Lisa Bell is never seen, but we know he was dead. That means Trinity has the kill count at 4 so far, but of course, he wasn't done. Because then, he had to get rid of a man named Kyle Butler. Kyle was murdered outside of Trinity's usual structured 4-step cycle. Trinity killed him because Kyle found him outside his home trying to break in. At that time, Trinity was actively searching for Dexter Morgan, who had been using the alias Kyle Butler to protect himself. The killing was impulsive and defensive, and not at all something police would connect to Trinity. It was a rare deviation from Trinity's rigid structure, showing how dangerous he could be even when he wasn't being controlled by his trauma. Finally, there was the biggest bombshell of the entire show, the shocking murder of Rita Morgan. Her death didn't fit into Trinity's ritual either. Rita was killed in her own bathtub, eerily echoing the second stage of Trinity's cycle, but this time it wasn't done to recreate Vera's death. Instead, it was done in retaliation. After realizing Dexter had manipulated and hunted him, Trinity struck back in the most devastating way possible. He killed Rita for revenge before trying to go on the run, but of course, his getaway wouldn't last very long. With his 4 normal victims, Rita and Kyle Butler, Arthur Mitchell's contributions bring the season's kill count up to 6. They can't all be included in this analysis because they happened well before Dexter ever heard of Trinity, but when we think about how he had over 260 victims by the time he died, it's hard not to think of Season 4 as one of Dexter's deadliest, and the on-screen deaths just kept coming. While Deborah Barbara and former Special Agent Frank Lundy were trying to piece together the Trinity killer case. The homicide department was still taking on their normal caseload. One of the cases they were taking on first was the murder of Estrella Carazo. She was a 19-year-old young woman who had immigrated from Nicaragua for a better life. She worked as a waitress in Miami and took on occasional modeling jobs to get by. But she went missing one day, and soon after, her arm was found inside of a dead alligator's gut. As it turns out, she had been killed by the assistant of the photographer she had been modeling for, a creep named Timothy Brand, who had apparently done the same thing to at least 3 other women. It's not clear when he killed his other victims, though, so the next kills of this season to be considered in the total count would be the death of Johnny Rose and his victim. Rose was a drug addict and a thief who killed to get what he wanted. He worked alongside his strung-out junkie girlfriend, Nikki Wald. Eventually, she found out that Johnny was cheating on her, and she shot him in the chest, killing him almost instantly. Before that happened, the two of them had already collaborated on killing at least one other person during the season, which is what landed them on the police's radar in the first place. Altogether, that makes the death count for season 4 to 9 so far. Then, of course, there was the death of Frank Lundy. Although he had already retired from the FBI, he was trying to solve the Trinity case, which had plagued him for almost his entire career. No one ever put all the pieces together, so there was no official investigation into the Trinity killings when he was working at the FBI, but he never could let it go. Following the pattern to the death of Lisa Bell in Miami, Frank showed up there and started working on the case on his own. Although he did eventually wrap Deb into his investigation, he was getting closer and closer to figuring it all out, and that became his death sentence. In an attempt to protect her father from being arrested, a deranged reporter named Christine Hill tracked Lundy down and shot him one night. She shot Deb too, but Deb survived. Lundy wasn't as lucky. Unfortunately for Christine, her father was not impressed by what she did for him. Arthur rejected her just like he always had and even told her never to contact him again. All she ever cared about was getting her dad's approval, and now that that was off the table, she was completely lost. What's worse is that the police were onto her and were very close to proving that she shot Deb and Lundy. With all of that on her plate, Christine chose to take her own life rather than rot in prison. She and Lundy bring the death count to 11. Finally, there are Dexter's contributions. First, there was Benito Gomez. Dexter killed him for a couple of reasons, actually. First, Benito was a certified murderer. First, he killed his own girlfriend by beating her to death with his own hands. Then he killed another man, a father whose son found him beaten so badly his cheek was crushed, and one of his eyeballs was out of its socket. The second reason is because Benito was only let off because of Dexter's own sloppy work. Usually, Dexter catches killers who got off on a technicality or were never captured by police at all. This time, he fucked up in court, and that let Benito walk. So it was as personal as it was ritualistic for him to take care of Benito. Then came Zoe Kruger. Zoe was a corrupt cop who managed to kill her entire family and get away with it by framing and killing another person. Zoe felt crushed by family life and wanted out so she could live her life freely again. To achieve that, she killed her own young daughter and her husband. Then she staged the entire scene to look like an intruder was responsible for the deaths. She killed the man she said was responsible and planted his blood on the scene so he could never claim his innocence and she would never be suspected. She may have gotten away with it for years, but once Dexter had his sights on her, she was dead within the week. And Dexter wasn't finished. Season 4 was an interesting one for Dexter because it was the first time we see him kill an innocent man by mistake. Remember that model who was killed and fed to an alligator? Well, Dexter believed what the homicide department landed on initially when they said the photographer, Jonathan Farrow, was the perpetrator. He found her blood and a lot more in Farrow's studio and figured that was enough evidence to put him on his table. Farrow tried to tell Dexter he was innocent, but his pleas fell on deaf ears. Dexter killed Farrow in his usual fashion with a knife to the chest before dumping his body in the ocean. Of course, later Farrow's assistant confessed to everything, and Dexter was very torn up about killing an innocent man for about 5 minutes, but pretty soon he was on to the next target. Stan Beaudry may have never ended up on Dexter's table if it wasn't for the Trinity investigation. Beaudry was an older man and a trucker driver who had killed at least one person in his lifetime. According to Frank Lundy's notes, Beaudry killed a sex worker with a crowbar at some point and he got away with it all because the crowbar was contaminated while being held in evidence. Lundy thought that Beaudry could have possibly been the Trinity killer because his profession as a trucker gave him the resources and opportunity to travel the country the way Trinity was known to. But, of course, he wasn't Trinity, and the police were getting closer and closer to figuring out who the real killer was. But Dexter wanted Arthur for himself, so he killed Stan and used him as bait to throw the police off Arthur's trail, and it worked like a charm more or less. Arthur Mitchell became Dexter's final kill of the season. All of the hunting, vetting, lying, and killing finally culminated in the infamous Trinity killer being strapped to Dexter's kill table and bludgeoned to death with his own framing hammer. It was a death too good for someone as horrific as Arthur, but Dexter felt a strange kinship to him for some some reason, making his death a bit more merciful than it should have been. And of course, this was before Dexter knew that Rita had been killed. As a result, Arthur got a light death, but he was dead all the same. With Dexter's kills included, the final count for Season 4 is a whopping 16 deaths. But it isn't the deadliest by a mile. Season 8, total deaths, 18. The next honorable mention goes out to the final season of the original series. Though not by much, Season 8 has Season 4 beat in deaths, and that's mostly thanks to Oliver Saxon, the brain surgeon. Oliver was a very skilled serial killer with a deep-seated grudge. He had been noticeably disturbed since he was a child, and that landed him in a psychiatric facility at a very young age. But he burned the place to the ground, faked his own death, and escaped. From there, he stole the identity of a deceased kid and grew up using that name instead so he would never be tracked down or even looked for. His goal in life became getting back to and back at his mother, Dr. Evelyn Vogel. Once he tracked her down in Miami, his reign of terror began. He started by killing random people, dissecting their brains, and cutting out the part responsible for human empathy. He would mail those parts of the brain to his mother and leave the victims' bodies wherever he saw fit, perhaps assuming that he was too smart to get caught. He would also make people do his dirty work for him when he felt like it. Before it was all over, Saxon managed to rack up 8 victims in Miami. He started by killing a man named Robert Bailey. He shot him, scooped out part of his brain, and then dumped his body near the shore. That is what began the investigation into the brain surgeon. Saxon followed that up by forcing a man named Lyle Sussman to suffocate another man, Leonard Welks, to death. Then he killed Sussman with a swift shot to the back of the head. He carved part of Welks' brain out as well in his standard MO, and then staged the scene to make it seem as if Sussman worked alone and escaped. To pull it all together, Saxon had moved Sussman's body back to his own hunting cabin and staged that scene to make it look like he killed himself with a shotgun. That's 3 deaths already to start the season off. At some point, Oliver became obsessed with Dexter's new neighbor, Cassie Jollinston, and convinced her to go on a few dates with him. She was fine with it all at first, but she really had a crush on Dexter. So, when she planned to break it off with Saxon, he bludgeoned her to death, completely unrelated to the vendetta he had against his mother, but still in line with his past actions. Dexter later found out that Saxon was also responsible for the deaths of 2 of his past girlfriends. Cassie was just another one in that line, and shows how unstable the brain surgeon really was. Later, he tracked down and killed Zach Hamilton, Dexter's up-and-coming protege. He scooped out part of his brain too and left his body in Dexter's apartment to leave a message. And while that was quite a shock, it was nothing compared to the last kills that Saxon pulled. Saxon was a true monster, and he proved that when he killed his own mother right in front of Dexter's face just to prove a point. When he learned that Vogel was plotting with Dexter to take him down, Oliver struck first, slitting her throat and leaving her to bleed out in a matter of seconds. He tried to convince Dexter to back off before more people died, people Dexter cared about, but Dexter couldn't do that. He needed to get rid of Saxon, avenge Vogel, and make sure that no one else died because of him. Eventually, he got Saxon subdued and on a kill table, but Dexter backed out of the idea at the last minute, deciding instead to let Deb take Saxon in the old-fashioned way, in handcuffs. As noble as that may have been, it would be the worst mistake of Dexter's life. Before Deb could get to him, Saxon manipulated another man, Max Clayton, into freeing him from his restraints. Clayton was a federal marshal working with Private Eye Jacob Elway to hunt down fugitive Hannah McKay and bring her in. He'd been following Deborah and Dexter thinking they'd lead him to Hannah, but instead that trail led him to the abandoned building where Oliver Saxon was being held. Saxon stabbed him to death as soon as he was free, and then he shot Deb as she entered the room to stop him. She survived the initial gunshot wound but was later declared brain dead after suffering a stroke due to surgery complications. That made her the final victim of the brain surgeon in most people's eyes. Altogether, Saxon had 8 kills over the course of Season 8, and that's more than Dexter himself. Some kills are overlooked from this season, but they were still pretty grisly, and they definitely count towards the season's total. For instance, there is the unresolved death of a cyclist who was killed in a random hit and run. The homicide department is seen investigating that murder the day that Dexter lets Batista know that he plans to resign from the force to move to Argentina with his son Harrison and girlfriend Hannah McKay. There was also the stabbing victim the team had to investigate. It was one of the first scenes where Dexter saw Zach Hamilton gawking before finding out that Zach was a killer himself. Zach was responsible for the next death after he murdered his dad's mistress, Norma Rivera. Next, there was the murder of Miles Kastner, Hannah McKay's abusive husband who had been helping her avoid recapture after she broke out of jail in Season 7. And finally, before he was killed by the brain surgeon, Zach Hamilton got another victim when he killed his former classmate Sean Decker. These may be easily overlooked, but when taken into account, they bring Season 8's death count to 13 total by that point. Lastly, there are Dexter's kills for the season. He started off hacksawing an unidentified victim to death as part of his typical ritual. Next up, Dexter stabbed and killed a man named Andrew Briggs. Briggs was a thief and fence who was holed up with Deb at the beginning of the season. Deb still hated Dexter for what they had done to LaGuerta, and she quit her job and started work as a PI with Elway as a result. She kind of got off course during her investigation and began to like Briggs, so she stayed longer than she needed to. When Dexter found out where she was and that her proximity to Briggs put her in danger, he came to bring her home. Briggs tried to stop him, put his hands on Dexter, and ended up with a chest in his abdomen as a result. Then there was Ron Galuso. Galuso was a psychopath and a former patient of Dr. Vogel's. Dexter was initially vetting him because he thought he might be the brain surgeon. Even though Dexter wasn't right about that, it turned out that Galuso was still a killer, and worse than that, he was a cannibal. That's what landed him on Dexter's table. Dexter also took out another ex-patient of Vogel's, AJ Yates, after he kidnapped the doctor and threatened her life. He was also a killer, and a weird one at that. Yates was obsessed with women's feet. He broke their pinky toes and stole his victim's shoes before burying them. Dexter stabbed him through a mattress with a curtain rod to put an end to all of that. And lastly, Dexter got a hold of the season's white whale, Oliver Saxon. After shooting Deb, Saxon learned that she wasn't actually dead. He went to the hospital where she was being cared for, planning to finish the job, but he wouldn't get the chance. Batista caught him before he reached her room, and the police overpowered him and finally brought him in. He may have thought he was safe from Dexter being behind bars, but he was sorely mistaken. Dexter entered Saxon's holding cell under the guise of performing a gunshot residue test. Instead, he let Saxon know right away that he was actually there to kill him with a pen. He let Saxon get the first blow to make what he did next look like self-defense. Saxon stabbed Dexter in the arm with the pen, but unfazed, Dexter removed the pen from his arm and buried it in Saxon's jugular. He was laying dead in a puddle of his own blood in seconds. With the brain surgeon dead and the last kill of the original show, Season 8 concluded with 18 official deaths, and while that does seem like a lot, it's nothing compared to the count of the true deadliest season of Dexter. Season 6, total deaths, 29. Yes, as gruesome as those other seasons were, they pale in comparison to the 6th season of Dexter. Season 6, over 24 kills, and that number is due in no small part to Travis Marshall, the deeply delusional doomsday killer. Travis Marshall had been a killer since he was a child. He started by getting rid of his parents in a car crash that he intentionally caused. Assuming he didn't kill anyone else until he was an adult, he definitely made up for lost time when he killed his professor, James Geller. Believing that he and his former professor were two witnesses of God sent to start the end of days, Travis stabbed Geller with a sword when he told him he was delusional about all of that. Travis claimed it was to show Geller that they couldn't be hurt because God would protect them. But he is a rageful maniac, so Travis could have just done it to get Geller out of his way and make sure he couldn't turn him in for stealing the ancient sword he used in the attack. With Geller out of the way, Travis went on about trying to start the apocalypse in a series of 7 grisly tableaus, symbolic ritual killings, each with a new victim. Before Dexter could stop him, Travis managed to kill 6 more innocent people in his twisted rituals, including his own sister. So, not counting his parents, because they were killed during the season or even shown on screen, Travis brings the kill count for Season 6 up to 7, all on his own with those tableaus. But his hands were still even bloodier. When things started heating up with the police, Travis realized that he needed help if he was going to finish his plan. He enlisted 2 equally delusional people to help him. Steve and Beth Dorsey followed his posts online and believed that Geller was still alive and working with Travis as well. They happily joined his cause, and as a result, they would both be dead in a matter of days. Steve was stabbed by Dexter, who mistook him for Travis himself, and Beth died by inhaling the poisonous wormwood gas that Travis and she planned to release in the police headquarters to kill everyone there. Dexter managed to get everyone out in the nick of time, leaving Beth as the only casualty from the wormwood, but Travis still wasn't done. With his disciples dead and Dexter on his tail, Travis was desperate and needed to stay hidden. He broke into the house of an elderly couple and killed them both so he could use their home as a base while he planned his next steps. The poor couple was found rotting on their own floor after Travis fled the home to start his final tableau. That last tableau was supposed to include the sacrifice of an innocent at the highest point of the city. Guessing his next move, Deborah, acting in her new role as the lieutenant of homicide, ordered uniformed officers to the top of all of the tallest buildings in Miami. That is where Travis found his final victim. Dexter was able to stop Travis from making that final sacrifice, who, interestingly enough, was meant to be Dexter's own son, Harrison, but not before Travis murdered the officer sent to cover the Transcorp building he had his eye on to complete his apocalyptic mission. That brings the season's death count up to 12 victims, and that's before even factoring in Dexter's other regular targets or their victims. Even as he was hunting the Doomsday Killers alongside the police, Dexter still had to feed his dark passenger regularly on his own too. He started the season off strong, targeting 2 killer paramedics who had been letting the injured people they were sent to save die so they could harvest their organs and sell them on the black market. Pretty deserving victims by Dexter's standards, but they were just an appetizer for him. Pretty soon after them, Dexter was at his high school reunion targeting an old classmate, Joe Walker. Dexter knew Joe killed his own wife and took action against him for that alone. Next, after the homicide department discovered the corpse of a young woman with a strange injury to her lateral incisor, Dexter tracked down her killer, too. It was a man named Walter Kenny who turned out to be the Tooth Fairy, a serial killer who operated in the 80s in Oregon but was never caught. Dexter followed the Tooth Fairy case when he was younger, so he knew from the tooth damage on the victim, Tooth Fairies had to be the one responsible. As it turned out, Dexter was right. Kenny was the killer, but he was much older and moved to Florida to retire. Dexter got him on his table and suffocated him so it would look like he died of a heart attack before returning his body to his room at the nursing home he lived in. With both him and his victim dead, the Tooth Fairy's brief arc brings the season total kills up to 17. Before the season was over, Dexter would kill a lot more people. He killed an ex-con named Nick for shooting his friend brother Sam in cold blood. He killed a man named Julio Benny's who threatened Sam and had been killing people as an enforcer for a local gang. Dexter also went to Nebraska and racked up yet another kill. A man named Norm who operated the motel he stopped at. Norm was threatening to kill Dexter and planned to extort him for $10,000 to keep quiet about the weird items he found in Dexter's car while working on his blown tire. There was also a blast from the past when Dexter tracked down the Trinity Killer's son, Jonah Mitchell, who confessed to killing his own mother and finding his sister dead by suicide in the bathtub of their safe house. Between Dexter's minor kills, brother Sam's death, Jonah's kill, and his sister's suicide, the death count for season 6 reaches in 23, but it keeps growing. There were some deaths people tend to forget that also took place in season 6. There was the couple who died of murder-suicide after the wife found her husband cheating. The bloody corpses of Caitlin and Jim Watson were shown on screen, and the case was investigated and eventually solved by Dexter, Deb, and Detective Mike Anderson. Mike would also end up killing Leo Hernandez, a dangerous gang member who had taken over as the shot caller of the Locos gang after Dexter killed Julio earlier in the season. Then there was the death of Thomas Matthews' call girl, Jessica Morris. Her death was an accidental heroin overdose, but it looked so much worse because Matthews fled the scene in a panic instead of calling it in when he found her. Death count of the season, 27 and still counting. After being abducted by Travis Marshall and left to die in the Lake of Fire tableau, Dexter managed to escape the flames, but was left drifting at sea, thinking he would be the next death himself. But he was rescued at the last minute by a raft carrying immigrants to the Florida coast. But the person manning the dinky little boat planned to rob everyone on board of whatever valuables they had, or kill them and kick them overboard if they refused. When Dexter saw him pointing a gun to a pregnant woman's head and stomach and demanding money, he stabbed him through the back and pushed his body and the gun into the water. That allowed Dexter and all of the desperate people on the raft to get to the shore safely, and after surviving all of that, Dexter only had one person left to take care of. Travis Marshall would be the final kill of the season. After Dexter saved Harrison from being sacrificed on top of the Transcorp building, he got Harrison to safety and got Travis strapped to his kill table. It would have been the perfect kill and the perfect end to a tumultuous season if Deb hadn't walked in and saw everything, just as Dexter stabbed Travis in the chest. Chaotic ending aside, Travis's death brought the final count for season 6 to an astonishing total of 29 disturbing deaths. That is more than any other single season of the original show or any of the spin-off series. With numbers like that, season 6 is without a doubt the deadliest season of Dexter by a long shot. But which season was your favorite? Do more kills make for a better season? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you like this breakdown, check out our video covering the darkest Dexter theories so far. Remember to slash that subscribe button for more deadly good videos. As always, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.